I stood beside a stranger in the moonlit line. Then Alpha King turned, inhaled, and whispered, "Mate." The forest stretched endlessly beneath the pale silver of the moon. Mist coiled between the twisted trunks, whispering secrets older than any living thing. Alara's heart beat with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had never ventured this far before, but tonight the palace walls had felt like a cage too tight to breathe in. The court was full of whispers and schemes, and every glance carried judgment. Here, under the moon's soft glow, she could pretend to vanish into the shadows. Her fingers brushed against the bark of a tree as she walked, feeling its roughness and grounding herself. Each step on the damp earth echoed softly, accompanied by the distant rustle of leaves. The forest seemed alive, watching her, as if it knew her thoughts before she did. A strange pull had led her here, something she could neither name nor resist. Then she saw it, a line of people standing silently in the clearing, illuminated by the moon's cold light. They were strangers, faces pale and serious, as if they had all been called by the same invisible force. Alara hesitated at the edge of the line, her heart twisted in confusion. Why were they here? What had drawn them to this moonlit meeting? And then she noticed him. He emerged from the mist like a shadow taking form, taller than any man she had ever seen. His presence demanded attention without a word. Every motion was careful, deliberate, as if the world itself bent slightly in his direction. His eyes, dark and deep, swept over the line with quiet authority. Alara felt a strange heat rising in her chest as his gaze lingered on her. He was the Alpha King. The stories told in hushed tones at court could not capture the truth of him. Kale, the ruler whose name was both feared and revered, was more than legend. He carried the weight of his kingdom's pain, and perhaps his own. Alara had only glimpsed him at court, where he moved like ice through fire, but here in the moonlight he seemed almost alive, raw and untamed. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Words felt impossible, useless. The forest seemed to quiet itself, and Alara's chest tightened with a strange certainty that this encounter would change her forever. Then he spoke, but only a single word, soft as a breeze through the leaves. "Mate." The sound of it was like a chord struck in the deepest part of her soul. Alara's knees almost gave way, and she clenched her fists to steady herself. Mate. A word she barely understood but felt as if it had been written into her very being. She wanted to run, to flee from the intensity of it, but her feet would not obey. Kale's eyes held hers, unblinking, unyielding. He was both a storm and a sanctuary, terrifying and magnetic at once. She felt drawn to him against all reason, as if some invisible thread had tied their hearts together long before this moment. The line of strangers remained silent. Some watched nervously, others seemed unaware of the connection sparking between Alara and the Alpha King. But she felt it everywhere, the pull of something greater than either of them, something dangerous and beautiful. Kale's voice was a low murmur now, almost lost in the rustle of the leaves. "Do you feel it?" Alara nodded, though her lips trembled. I don't know. "I feel something." "Good," he said, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. "That is the beginning." The forest seemed to hold its breath. A deer's distant call echoed through the trees, a reminder that life continued beyond this strange, suspended moment. But for Alara, time had already begun to warp. Every heartbeat, every inhalation felt magnified. She was aware of the mist curling around her ankles, of the faint shimmer of the moonlight on Kale's shoulders, of the way the world itself seemed smaller when he looked at her. She took a cautious step forward. "Why am I here?" she asked. Her voice was stronger than she expected, though her hands shook slightly. Kale's gaze softened, and for a brief moment the mask of the Alpha King slipped. He was not just a ruler here. He was a man, burdened by a crown he could hardly lift and by a curse he carried silently. "You are here because you were meant to be," he said. "Some paths are chosen not by reason but by fate." Alara's mind reeled. Fate. The word felt heavy, almost sacred. She had grown up hearing of destiny and prophecy, of heroes and monsters, but never had she truly believed it applied to her. And yet, looking into Kale's eyes, she knew this was real. A sudden movement in the line made her glance away. Other strangers had begun to stir, shifting nervously, murmuring to one another. But Kale's attention never wavered from her. He stepped closer, and the space between them seemed charged, alive with a current she could not name. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart raced, and with it came a dizzying mix of fear and longing. She wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but no words would come. She realized with a strange clarity that she was seeing not just a king, but a man who carried centuries of grief, solitude, and power all at once. And yet, in the midst of it, he had chosen to notice her. Kale inclined his head slightly, a gesture both formal and intimate. "Do not be afraid," he said. "There is more to this night than you understand, but you will." The mist swirled around them, curling like fingers around their feet. Shadows danced across the clearing, and the moon cast long, pale beams that touched everything with a silver glow. Ilara felt as if the forest itself was watching, waiting for the next movement in a story older than memory. "Why me?" she whispered finally, the question escaping like a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Kale's eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "Because you are capable," he said simply. "Capable of seeing, of feeling, of surviving, and because the bond has chosen you." The word bond made Ilara's pulse quicken. She did not yet understand what it meant, but she could feel it, an invisible thread tying her to him, pulling her closer even as the night pressed in around them. A sudden rustle from the trees snapped her attention outward. She saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trunks, watching them. Her heart leapt. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. Kale's hand lifted slightly, a silent command. The shadow froze, then vanished into the darkness as if it had never been. "The night has many eyes," he murmured, "but none will touch us unless we allow it." Ilara nodded, swallowing hard. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet so strangely protected. The Alpha King, the man she barely knew, held an invisible shield around her with nothing but his presence. She could feel the weight of his power, not just in his body, but in the way the world seemed to bend subtly toward him. The forest grew quieter, the whispers fading to a gentle hum. For a moment, there was only the two of them and the moon. Ilara wanted to speak, to ask all the questions burning in her mind, but the right words refused to come. She realized that some things were meant to be felt first, understood later. Kale stepped closer again, the distance between them shrinking until it felt as if a single breath separated their worlds. His gaze bore into hers, intense and unwavering. "Tonight is only the beginning," he said. "The path will not be easy. Shadows will test us. But if you stay, if you endure, you will understand why you were chosen." Ilara's lips parted, but before she could reply, a sudden wind swept through the clearing, swirling the mist into a small vortex. Leaves lifted from the ground and danced around them. The forest seemed to hum with energy, as if the earth itself acknowledged the bond forming in that moonlit line. And then Kale did something she had not expected. He extended his hand, not as a ruler to a subject, but as a man offering trust, offering connection. "Take it," he said softly, "if you are ready." Her heart thundered in her chest. Trembling, she reached out. Their fingers brushed and an electric warmth surged through her. The pull between them tightened, invisible yet undeniable. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the mist wrapping around them like a protective cocoon. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single touch. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Kale stepped back. His gaze lingered on her, full of unsaid words and promise, before he turned and vanished into the mist. Ilara was left standing alone, the echo of his whisper still vibrating in her chest. "Mate." Her knees threatened to buckle, but she forced herself upright. The line of strangers had dispersed, leaving only the pale moonlight and the restless forest. Yet she knew, with a certainty that startled her, that nothing would ever be the same again. Something had begun tonight, something powerful, dangerous, and beautiful. She took a step forward, then another, and whispered into the still night, almost hoping he could hear her. "I will find you." The forest seemed to answer only with the rustle of leaves, but in her heart she already knew. The Alpha King, the mate she had not yet understood, was waiting. And the journey had only just begun. The castle loomed in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the pale moon. Its towers clawed at the sky, and the walls seemed carved from stone and shadow. Alara had never seen a place like this, not even in her dreams. The journey had been long, through misted forests and over cliffs that fell sharply into the roaring sea. Yet every step she took toward Kale's domain only made her heartbeat quicken, as if the castle itself was alive and aware of her presence. She had arrived under the sun's fading light, the last traces of day slipping into twilight. Guards in dark armor lined the outer gates, their faces unreadable, their eyes sharp and cautious. She could feel their judgment, their skepticism, but Kale's name carried weight, and no one dared challenge her passage. The grand hall opened before her, immense and cold, yet touched with eerie beauty. Tapestries depicting battles and rulers long gone hung along the walls, their colors faded to muted shades by time. Candles flickered in sconces carved from black stone, casting shadows that moved like living creatures. Alara could feel the pulse of the place, as if the castle itself had a heartbeat. And then she saw him. Kale sat on a throne carved from dark iron, a figure of power and quiet menace. Even seated, he seemed taller, larger than life. His gaze, when it met hers, was both warning and invitation. A thrill of fear and anticipation ran through her. She had imagined this moment countless times in the forest, yet seeing him in the grandeur of his castle made her feel smaller, more exposed, yet impossible to resist. "Alara," he said, his voice low, carrying over the hall like a ripple of calm before a storm. "You have come." She bowed slightly, unsure whether formality or instinct should guide her. "I did," she said softly. I want to understand." Kale's lips curved slightly, almost a smile, but his eyes never softened completely. "Understanding comes with patience," he said, "and courage, both of which you will need here." He rose from the throne, each step deliberate. The guards did not flinch, though their hands hovered near their weapons. Kale's presence alone seemed enough to command them, and yet there was something more, something unseen but palpable in the air between him and Alara. "Come," he said, gesturing toward a narrow corridor that led deeper into the castle. "You must see the truth of this place." "And of me?" Alara followed, her heart beating faster with every step. The walls were lined with portraits of rulers she did not recognize. Some seemed almost alive in the candlelight, their eyes following her as if judging her worthiness. She shivered. The castle was magnificent, yet the grandeur felt like a trap, beautiful but cold. "Why did you call me, mate?" she asked finally, unable to hold the question back. Kale's step slowed. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "It is not a choice I make lightly," he said, "nor is it something you can reject easily. It is deeper than words, a bond older than this castle, older than my rule, and now it has found you." Alara's throat tightened. The word bond felt heavy, sacred. She had never believed in such things, yet she could feel its pull already. Something inside her ached, as if the forest and the moonlight had stitched part of her soul to him. The corridors opened into a chamber that smelled of old stone and smoke. The walls were lined with shelves of books bound in leather and parchment, ancient and fragile. Candles flickered on tall stands, casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. Kale moved to a window, overlooking the cliffs and the roaring sea beyond. "This castle is both shield and prison," he said. "It has kept me alive and bound me at the same time, and now you are part of that story." Alara stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the edge of the window sill. "I don't understand," she admitted. "Why me? Why now?" Kale's gaze softened just a fraction. "Because you are not afraid to see me as I truly am," he said. "And because the bond chooses those who are capable, those who can endure." Endure. The word resonated through her chest. She had endured a life of rules and expectation, of whispers behind closed doors. Yet this was something entirely different. To endure Kale, to endure what was coming, would demand everything she had: heart, mind, and soul. A sudden noise made her jump. A servant appeared at the edge of the room, bowing quickly. "Your Grace, the council waits. They demand your attention." Kale's expression hardened. "So the court stirs," he murmured. His eyes flicked back to Alara. "They do not understand this bond. They will try to control it." "To control you. Be wary." Alara nodded, fear and excitement mingling in her chest. She had seen whispers at court, the jealous glances and veiled threats. And now in this castle the tension was thicker, heavier, pressing on her shoulders. She wondered if she could survive in this world, so full of power, secrecy, and danger. Kale led her to a smaller chamber where the council waited, men and women of stern faces and guarded eyes. Their whispers stopped as they entered, and the silence was thick. The council had always controlled Kale in some way, guiding his decisions, shaping his rule. But here, with Alara beside him, their authority seemed fragile. "Your Majesty," one of the elders said cautiously, "the borders have been restless. The northern provinces demand attention. We cannot allow instability to grow." Kale's gaze was sharp. "I am aware," he said, "but there are greater matters than rebellion, matters that concern the heart as well as the crown." The council murmured uneasily. Alara realized with a pang that she was part of this larger struggle, a piece in a game she barely understood. Yet Kale's presence beside her made her feel both vulnerable and protected. When the meeting ended, Kale walked with her through the castle halls, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. Finally, he stopped near a balcony overlooking the cliffs. The sea crashed against jagged rocks below, white foam leaping in the moonlight. "Alara," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "you are stronger than you know. And this bond, it will test you, test us. But it is not only a burden, it can be our strength if we let it." She looked into his eyes, seeing the weight he carried. There was a darkness there, but also a vulnerability he rarely showed to anyone. And for the first time, she understood the true depth of what he had said in the forest. To be his mate was to share not just affection, but a part of himself, his burdens and his fears. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. Her voice was soft but honest. "I don't know if I'm ready." Kale reached out, his hand brushing hers. The contact was gentle, yet it carried a current of power and connection. "You are ready," he said simply. "You will be ready. You must trust the bond, and trust me." Alara nodded slowly, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. The castle, the court, even the dangers outside, they all seemed to fade for a moment, leaving only the pull between them. She wanted to speak, to ask him what lay ahead, but the words escaped her. She realized that some things could not be explained, only felt. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hall below. Alara's heart leapt. Kale's expression hardened instantly, the calm mask returning. "Stay here," he ordered. "Do not move." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving with supernatural speed down the corridor. Alara's breath came in short gasps as she pressed herself against the balcony railing, trying to see what had happened. Shadows moved in the corridors, figures she could not identify. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange thrill. The danger, the uncertainty, the pull of the bond, it made her feel alive in a way she never had before. Minutes passed, each stretched by tension. Then Kale returned, his expression controlled but intense. He held no weapon, yet his presence radiated power. "It is done," he said. "No one interfered yet. But you must understand, Alara, the world outside this castle is restless, and not all will accept the bond." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. I understand," she said, though she did not fully, but she wanted to. More than anything, she wanted to face what was coming, not alone but with him. Kale's gaze softened just slightly. Good, then rest. Tomorrow you must meet those who will test your courage and your heart. They will not understand, but you must endure, for the bond and for what we might become together. Alara nodded, her mind racing with questions, fear, and longing. But beneath it all was a strange certainty. She could not deny the pull of the bond, nor the way Kale had entered her life like a storm she had always been waiting for. As she lay in her chamber that night, staring at the pale moonlight filtering through the tall windows, she felt it again. The pull, the connection, the silent promise that their story had only begun. And somewhere deep in the castle, she knew, Kale felt it too. The night stretched on, filled with shadows and whispers. And though the dangers outside the castle walls were real and pressing, Alara could not shake the feeling that the most important journey had only just begun. The one that would bind her heart to Kale's, in ways both terrifying and beautiful. The castle's halls were quieter at night, but not silent. Shadows clung to the corners like memories refusing to fade, and the flickering candlelight cast shapes that seemed alive. Alara walked beside Kale, her steps hesitant yet determined. Tonight she would see what he had hidden from the world, the truth behind his power, his solitude, and the whispered word that had bound their fates together. Kale led her to a narrow stairway, carved deep into the stone of the castle. The air grew colder as they descended, carrying the scent of earth and old magic. The walls were etched with ancient symbols, worn smooth by centuries of hands tracing them. Alara's curiosity and fear mingled, her heart beating faster with every step. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "To the past," Kale said, his voice low, "and to the part of me no one has ever seen, not even the court, not even my closest advisors." Alara swallowed. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," he said, his eyes dark and intense. "But first you must be ready. You must know that once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you feel, you cannot unfeel. Are you prepared for that?" She nodded, though a flutter of doubt touched her chest. She did not fully understand what she was agreeing to, but she knew one thing. She wanted to face it with him. "I'm ready," she whispered. The stairway opened into a chamber unlike any other in the castle. The walls glowed with faint, silvery runes, and the floor was polished stone, reflecting the dim light like water. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, carved from black marble, upon which lay a single crystal orb. Its surface shimmered with movement, as though it held shadows that whispered secrets to those who dared look. "This is where the curse began," Kale said. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing the orb without touching it. "And where it can end if we have the strength." Alara moved beside him, drawn by the strange energy radiating from the crystal. "A curse," she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "You mean all of this, everything, it's because of a curse?" Kale's jaw tightened. "It is more than a curse. It is a bond of pain and power, placed upon me centuries ago by those who feared what I could become. It ties me to my kingdom in ways you cannot imagine. I feel everything, the suffering, the betrayal, the fear, as if it is my own, and I cannot release it alone." Alara's breath caught. "You've carried this all alone," he nodded slowly. "Until now, you are part of it whether you realize it or not. The bond chose you because you are capable of helping me bear it and perhaps breaking it." Her mind spun. She had always imagined danger as swords, armies, or enemies in the court. She had never imagined it as something that could live inside a man, a weight that stretched his soul until it threatened to shatter. And yet, looking at Kale, she could see it, the shadows in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly as he turned the orb in the light. "Show me," she said softly. "I want to see. I want to understand." Kale hesitated, then nodded. He placed his hands on the orb, and the crystal pulsed with light. Images appeared inside it, shimmering like mist. Alara gasped as the visions unfolded before her eyes. Cities in ruin, people in pain, betrayal after betrayal. a crown soaked in both glory and suffering. She saw Kale in every scene, yet also a younger version of him, a boy forced to bear a kingdom's weight long before he was ready. "I've lived it all," Kale whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Every loss, every fear, every shadow, and I have endured because I had to. Because no one could help me, until now." Alara reached out, her hand hovering near his. "You don't have to endure alone anymore," she said. "I'm here. I want to help." For the first time, Kale's mask of authority slipped entirely. He looked at her with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked. "The bond will share my pain with you, every sorrow I have carried, every fear, every shadow." Alara's breath caught. The weight of his words was almost unbearable. But beneath it, a flame of determination ignited. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "And I will face it with you." Kale's eyes softened just slightly. "Then let it begin," he said. He pressed the orb to his chest, and a wave of silver light burst outward, enveloping both of them. At first, it was disorienting. Shadows danced across the chamber, whispering in voices that were both familiar and strange. Alara felt a sudden pull in her chest, as if invisible threads were stitching her heart to Kale's. She gasped as she felt his memories, his pain, his loneliness, flood into her own mind. Every sorrow he had endured became hers to carry, and yet she felt a strange strength growing in response. She saw his childhood, lonely and cold, a boy learning to survive in a world that demanded too much of him. She saw betrayals by friends and advisors, decisions that cost lives, the crown heavy on his young head. She felt his rage, his fear, his despair, and with it, an unexpected compassion, a tenderness that no one else had ever seen. Kale's voice broke through the visions. "Can you bear it?" he asked, his hand tightening around hers. Alara nodded, tears streaming down her face. I can," she whispered. "I feel it all, but I can share it with you. You don't have to carry it alone." The orb pulsed again, and the visions began to fade, leaving a silence that was almost deafening. The chamber felt warmer, lighter, as though the bond had shifted something fundamental between them. Kale's hand remained on hers, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said softly. "And yet, this is only the beginning. There are still those who would exploit my curse, who would see the bond as a weapon or as a weakness. You must be ready for what comes next." Alara nodded, feeling both fear and courage. "I am ready," she said, "as long as we face it together." Kale looked at her, and for a moment the weight of centuries seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders. "Together," he agreed. The silence between them was heavy yet comforting. The bond was no longer just a word whispered in the forest. It was real, alive, and it connected them in ways both terrifying and beautiful. Alara felt the pull of it in every breath, every heartbeat, every thought. She had never imagined that a connection could be so consuming, so intimate without words, so powerful without touch. But even as they stood there, a shadow flickered at the edge of the chamber. Alara's heart tightened. She had sensed it before, a presence that did not belong, a danger lurking in the corners of the castle. Kale noticed her unease. "Do not be afraid," he said. "This bond protects us, but you must be cautious. The world outside is restless and the darkness will not wait." Alara nodded, trying to steady her breath. I understand." Kale's hand squeezed hers gently. "Good, rest now. Tomorrow you must learn to wield the bond, not just feel it. There are trials ahead and we must face them together." As Alara lay in her chamber that night, she could still feel the pulse of the bond, the lingering warmth of Kale's presence. The visions had left her exhausted, but also filled with a new understanding. She knew now that Kale's strength was not just in his power as a king, but in his resilience, his courage, and the depths of his heart. And she knew with an unshakable certainty that she wanted to be part of that strength. Yet fear remained, too. The bond had revealed much, but it also carried weight. She could feel the shadows still lingering at the edges of her mind, whispers of doubt and danger that she could not ignore. And she knew that the path ahead would test not only their courage but their hearts. Somewhere deep in the castle, Cale stood by the window, looking out over the cliffs and the restless sea. He felt her presence, the bond tugging at him, reminding him that they were no longer alone. And yet he also felt the weight of what was coming, enemies unseen, challenges unspoken, and the curse that still lingered, demanding a price he had not yet calculated. But for the first time in centuries, he felt hope. Hope that the bond, the mate he had chosen without realizing it, could help him endure, survive, and perhaps even find redemption. And as the moon cast its pale light across the castle, Alara and Cale slept, or tried to, each feeling the other's presence like a heartbeat in the dark, knowing that the morning would bring new trials, new dangers, and new truths that would shape the rest of their story. Because the curse was not yet broken, but together they might survive it, and perhaps in the midst of shadows and pain, they might discover something even more powerful, love that could endure even the darkest night. The sky was dark, pierced only by the silver glow of the moon. Tonight was unlike any night before, the air thick with anticipation, the wind carrying whispers of power and warning. The lunar eclipse began to edge across the heavens, casting an eerie shadow over the castle. Every candle flickered, and even the stone walls seemed to shiver under the energy that pulsed through the world. Alara stood on the balcony, wrapped in a cloak of midnight blue. She felt the bond between her and Cale like a living thread, pulling at her chest, connecting her to his every heartbeat. The visions of the curse, the memories of pain and loss she had shared with him, throbbed in her mind, reminding her of the weight they carried together. Yet beneath it all there was strength, a growing courage that made her feel alive in ways she had never imagined. Cale emerged from the shadows behind her, his cloak sweeping across the stone. He moved with silent power, every step deliberate. The crown he wore was heavy, a symbol of authority, yet tonight it seemed almost secondary to the bond that linked them. His eyes found hers, and for a moment the chaos of the world fell away. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Alara nodded, though her heart raced. "I am with you," Cale's lips curved in a fleeting smile. "Good, then we begin." The castle's great doors opened and shadows moved along the halls. The enemy was coming, those who sought to exploit the curse, who would see Cale's power and the bond as weakness to be destroyed. But they were not prepared for what Cale and Alara had become. Together, their bond radiated an energy that was both protective and dangerous, a light in the encroaching darkness. They moved through the corridors side by side, silent but synchronized. The bond allowed them to anticipate each other's thoughts, each movement, each intention. It was more than trust, it was connection, a union of mind, heart, and soul. As they reached the grand hall, the enemy revealed themselves. Figures clad in dark armor, faces masked, weapons glinting under the dim light. They had come to claim the throne, to seize the power of the curse for themselves. But Cale and Alara stood as one, unyielding, the bond between them palpable, almost visible in the shimmer of the eclipse above. "You should not have come," Cale said, his voice sharp, commanding. "This castle, this kingdom, is not yours to take." One of the attackers stepped forward, a figure taller than the rest, radiating malice. "Power is earned, not inherited," the voice hissed, "and the Alpha King has grown weak." Cale's eyes darkened. "I am no one's weakness," he said. His hand brushed Alara's, and instantly they were linked, their energy flowing together. She felt his power, his courage, his fear, and she met it with her own. Together they were stronger, the bond amplifying every emotion, every thought, every heartbeat. The clash began. Steel rang against steel, shadows danced like living things, and the hall became a storm of movement and sound. But Cale and Alara did not falter. Every strike he made, every block, every maneuver was mirrored by her understanding of him. their bond allowing them to anticipate the enemy's actions with uncanny precision. Alara felt the pull of the curse again, a shadow brushing against her mind, testing her courage. She pushed it back with the strength of the bond, focusing on Kale, on their shared purpose. She could feel his emotions, his fears, his need to protect her, and she met it with resolve. Together, they turned the tide. The attackers faltered, unprepared for the unity and strength of two souls bound by fate. The crystal energy of Kale's curse, once a weight and a burden, now became a weapon of light and protection. Shadows that had threatened to consume them dissipated, drawn back into the orb that now pulsed with silver fire in Kale's hand. But even as victory neared, the final test awaited. From the shadows of the hall, a spirit emerged, the ancestor who had cursed Kale so long ago. Its presence filled the space with cold air and whispers of judgment. "You cannot have both," it hissed. "One must remain shadowed, one must bear the curse forever. Choose, Alpha King, and face the consequences." Kale's eyes flickered to Alara. The bond throbbed between them, stronger than ever, and for a moment, fear touched him. To lose her, to let the curse consume either of them, was unthinkable. But the bond had taught him something the curse could not. Love was not weakness, and connection was not defeat. "No," Kale said firmly, "we choose together." Alara stepped forward, her hand in his. "We are one," she said. "The bond is not just yours or mine, it is ours. We endure together or not at all." The spirit shrieked, its form twisting in fury. But the bond glowed brighter, silver light weaving between Kale and Alara, stronger than any curse, any shadow, any force that sought to tear them apart. They faced the trial together, their hearts and minds synchronized, their courage amplified by love and connection. The air trembled, the walls shook, and the orb on the pedestal shone with blinding light. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a final pulse, the curse shattered. Shadows dissolved, the oppressive weight lifted, and the spirit vanished with a wail that echoed through the halls and into the cliffs beyond. Kale collapsed to his knees, exhausted but alive. Alara knelt beside him, her hands on his shoulders, feeling the bond still pulsing gently between them. The castle was silent, bathed in the soft silver of the moon, the eclipse reaching its peak. They had endured. They had survived. They had broken the curse together. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the enormity of what had just happened settling between them. Kale's eyes were soft, vulnerable, filled with gratitude and something deeper, a longing that had finally found fulfillment. "You are incredible," he said, his voice low, raw with emotion. "I would not have survived without you." Alara smiled, though her eyes glistened with tears. "And I would not have faced it alone if not for you. We faced it together." The bond between them was no longer just a whisper of fate. It was real, alive, and unbreakable. It had brought them through darkness, fear, and danger. And now it was a source of strength, a shared heartbeat that would guide them into whatever the future held. Kale took her hands in his, lifting them to his lips. "We are not just alpha and mate," he said softly. "We are equals. Together, nothing can break us." Alara nodded, the warmth of his words and the depth of their connection filling her chest. The journey had been long, filled with shadows and tests, but in this moment, standing together under the silver moonlight, she knew they were unstoppable. The castle, once a place of shadow and isolation, now felt alive with possibility. The walls no longer seemed oppressive but protective. The echoes of the past had been acknowledged and released, leaving space for something new, a future they would build together, unafraid and unbroken. Outside, the eclipse reached its zenith, bathing the cliffs and the roaring sea below in an otherworldly light. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying with it the promise of hope and the triumph of courage. Kale turned to Alara, his expression both tender and resolute. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow we face the world, but tonight we have each other, and that is enough." Alara leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The bond hummed softly, a reminder of the journey they had taken and the strength they had found in each other. For the first time in her life, she felt completely safe, completely seen, and completely connected. In the quiet of the castle, with the silver moon casting its light across the stone, Alara and Kale sat together, bound not by curse or duty, but by choice, by love, and by the shared strength that only they could understand. And as the night stretched on, they knew one truth above all else. The world outside might still be dangerous, full of shadows and challenges, but together they could endure anything. The curse had been broken, but the bond remained, a force of light and love, unshakable, eternal, and destined to guide them through every shadowed path that lay ahead. The night carried their silence, filled not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet triumph of two souls who had found each other, survived together, and transformed their destiny. The moon slipped behind the clouds, casting the castle in gentle shadow, and for the first time in centuries, Kale and Alara could breathe freely, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Their story had reached a turning point. The curse was gone, the shadows were conquered, and their hearts were bound forever. But in the quiet of that moonlit night, they both knew this was only the beginning of a life filled with strength, love, and shared destiny.